Sammy Wilson.
Speaker, and can I thank you for calling me so early in this debate. Can I first of all start off by welcoming some of the measures which are in the budget today. Whilst there has been a reduction as a result of the top slicing of departments in their current spending of 1%, nevertheless, and I don't think the Chancellor actually meant this to happen, I don't think it was deliberate, but as a result of the way in which the Barnett formula works, Northern Ireland will actually benefit over the 2 years by about £59 million additional spending. Of course, that helps to replace some of the 40% reduction in capital spending which was announced at the very beginning of the budget period when the government took over. The second thing I want to welcome is Northern Ireland's exemption from the carbon price floor. And I really do want to put it on the record here, Mr Deputy Speaker, the work which the Chief Secretary of the Treasury did on this. We took the point to him. This was going to devastate all of the electricity producers in Northern Ireland, leaving them uncompetitive. It was going to add to costs of generating electricity in Northern Ireland £20 million this year, rising to £45 million, which would have affected household bills by about 15% and also have made us dependent upon producers in the Irish Republic. And I think that the one thing I do want to say is that when a case is made to the government, they do respond, and it would be churlish of me not to have acknowledged that in the House today. There are some other measures that will have a positive impact on Northern Ireland. The change in the threshold for income tax will benefit 7,000 families. The employment tax exemption will benefit 25,000 small businesses in Northern Ireland, and of course the fuel duty not going up in September will benefit motorists as well.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Can he tell us what the effect of that will be on motorists in Northern Ireland? And that's particularly relevant given that Northern Ireland has the highest prices for petrol and diesel, not only in the UK, but for most of the European Union.
Well, for the average haulier, per vehicle, it would be about £750 saving per year. For the average motorist, £25 saving per year. And I think that, again, for the hard-pressed motorist, that is a good thing. The Chancellor made a lot about the monetary measures which he has introduced, and especially the funding for lending provision. Unfortunately, I've got to say, given the state of the banking industry in Northern Ireland and the fact that most of the banks in Northern Ireland aren't even part of the funding for lending, this is likely to have very little impact. But there are positive impacts, and I think it would be right to start off what I want to say today by acknowledging that. However, and I know it's easy to stand on this side when you don't have to make the decisions and criticise and be the kind of armchair economist who sees everything that's wrong and what should be done and what you would do if or what one would do if they were sitting on the other side. But I've got to say there are some issues which I think the Chancellor has got wrong. First of all, we've got a budget which he has said is fiscally neutral. Fiscally neutral at a time when the economy needs some form of stimulus. He has admitted in his speech it's not coming from consumer spending because consumers don't have the money to spend or the confidence. It's not coming from business spending because businesses are actually trying to contract their loans and deleverage during the recession. It's not coming, I'll just give away in a moment, it's not coming from exports because again, indeed our deficit is actually increasing. And therefore the only source of that stimulus has to come from what the government can do and what it can do in a practical way and also in a sustainable way. I'll give way. Yeah.
Could I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way? And would he agree with me that there is an ever-increasing need to stimulate our economy, particularly in Northern Ireland, whenever the figures for unemployment come out today, and they are the highest in the last 15 years, something like 23%, and has he any thoughts, wearing his other hat as well as his hat in here, about how the local economy should be stimulated?
Well, I'll thank the member for the intervention. It probably leads me on to a point that I want to make anyway. But what we have is a budget which the Chancellor has admitted, in fact boasted, is fiscally neutral. And while there are good things in it, and I've highlighted some of the impacts of the decisions which are made, it is a case of moving the existing money around, not having an increase in the total level of demand. And if it's not coming from exports, it's not coming from consumers, it's not coming from industry because of lack of confidence, then it's got to come as a result of properly targeted government initiatives. The second thing I want to say in relation to this is, I don't stand here on this side, and though we're on the opposition side, I don't actually have, nor do we have, a vested interest in government failure and the failure of economic policy. I want to see it succeeding. It means more jobs for people in Northern Ireland. It means a better standard of living for people in Northern Ireland. It means that we balance our economy. So I want to actually see the government's policy succeeding. But it is not a policy which is designed for success. It's a policy which simply tries to hold on to the fiscal position which the government is facing at the moment. And indeed, if one looks at all the targets that the Chancellor set out for himself, he wanted to increase confidence in the economy. Yet we have seen low demand for consumers. We have seen firms not taking up loans, and the member for Wokingham mentioned this in his speech, either because they can't get money from the banks or they don't believe that there is any point in investing at the moment. Firms are running down their levels of stock because they do not see prospects for additional sales in the future. The Chancellor set himself another objective: to keep Britain's credit rating. And that's slipping. And it's slipping because those people who make the assessments are now looking at the state of the British economy and saying, when are they going to get out of this downward cycle of debt? If there's no growth, we cannot pay off the debt. Well, I don't have much any additional time, but since I haven't taken an intervention from that side, I will.
Well, I'm grateful to him, but does he recognise that, in fact, what the ratings agencies said is that if we didn't stick to our fiscal deficit plans, they would downgrade us still further? So, in fact, that reduction in the AAA rating is an incentive to do more to cut our deficit, not to do less.
Yeah, that is what they said.
And indeed, and I'm glad the member raised, the honourable lady raised that point, because that's the next point I want to come to. The Chancellor set himself the objective of reducing debt, yet look at the red book that we have today. From the autumn forecast in 2012 to this budget, by 2015, the end of this Parliament, government debt as a percentage of GDP, and this is over a period of what, 6 months, is going to increase from 80% of GDP to 85% of GDP. And the reason for it, of course, the chairman of the Treasury Committee gave us, that the automatic stabilisers are kicking in. What are we spending the money on? We're spending the money on benefits, paying people to be out on the dole, instead of spending money. And this is the point I want to come to. Instead of spending money on those kinds of things which would stimulate growth, increase the capacity of the economy, and enable us to pay our way out of the debt that we have, while at the same time giving people the dignity of being in a job where they actually do things which can make a positive contribution to the economy. And that's why I think the Chancellor has got this wrong. There has never been a better time for him to borrow. The 10-year price of bonds down 2%. It's been cheaper to borrow now than it's ever been. Borrowing for those kinds of things which will stimulate growth, which will increase the infrastructure in the economy, can be very useful. I will give way, yeah.
Will the honourable member accept that the issue, as he's just mentioned, is the ratio of debt to GDP? There's two ways of confront of it: get down debt or get up GDP. If we had growth, that ratio would go down, and he's ignored growth completely.
And the member's quite right. One of the reasons why it's increasing as a percentage of GDP is because GDP is falling at the same time as spending is having to go up to pay for the policy which has failed anyhow. And the question is, what kinds of things then, if the government wishes to borrow, what kinds of things should it be doing? And there are many, and I'm just going to give two examples of infrastructure projects in Northern Ireland where tens of millions of pounds were spent on them, and yet they are already beginning to have an impact on the economy. The first one is the investment which has gone into the broadband infrastructure in Northern Ireland as a result of initiatives that came from the Chancellor in previous budgets. And Project Kelvin, and also the broadband infrastructure around Belfast and Londonderry, has helped us to grow the financial services industry in Northern Ireland, which now employs nearly 30,000 people. Has helped us to grow the film industry in Northern Ireland, because both of them needed connectivity to North America. And there is now faster connectivity with North America from Northern Ireland than there is on the East Coast than there is from the West Coast of America to the East Coast. That has stimulated a whole range of other investment and makes sense when it comes to infrastructure investment. In our tourist industry, we spent nearly £100 million on two signature projects in the Titanic Signature Project and the Causeway Project. They were supposed to generate in this year, in 1 year, over 500,000 visitors. In the first 6 months, they more than doubled that. That was business for hotels in Northern Ireland, businesses for restaurants, taxi drivers, etc. So the point I want to make is this: that there is, and I think the member, I can't remember his constituency, made the point, there is good borrowing and bad borrowing. Yes. Bad borrowing where we pay to keep people at home on the dole, good borrowing where we pay to have infrastructure development which helps to increase the capacity of the economy. And I think that the trick that the Chancellor has missed in this is, instead of having a financially neutral budget, he ought to have been looking to the future and saying, what can we do? Where can we raise money to spend on projects which will, in the long run, generate more tax, generate jobs, give us growth, bring down the deficit? That was the trick which I think he has missed. And whilst I welcome the things which I mentioned at the very start of this, and whilst I acknowledge the way in which the Chancellor and the Treasury have responded to some of the points we have made from Northern Ireland, I think that for the country as a whole, there were things which could have been done, which haven't been done, which we will live to regret, and which will probably have the Chancellor standing at that dispatch box next year saying, I'd forecast this, and unfortunately I'm downgrading those forecasts again.